Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Frivolous Gravitas. Today, this is actually part two. Today with me is Jordan Roy, as always, my delightful co-host, and myself, Christopher Driver, talking to you on some uncertainty and the fear pertaining thereto. In the first part, we talked a lot about macro development uncertainties, things like the weather and economics and government policies and the financial collapse, as always, because that's a particularly sore spot for myself. But in this section of our talk, we're going to discuss a little bit more personal levels of uncertainty, and this sort of feeds into fear and decision making on a day-to-day level and how it affects us. So some of the ways that applies can be like as personal as health related. So like mental health itself and anxiety disorders are, as Jonathan Grayson wrote a book on OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, as an anxiety disorder that's typified by fears relating to uncertainty. But we talked a bit about how people respond and react and are riled up by uncertainty as well, either for political or power grabs by authorities or the financial system's dysfunction by CEOs and shareholders and executives and political policies, just to name a few. So in this second part, we're going to be talking about insecurity as it relates to people individually, more or less. And that could be anything from racism and immigration issues to how you parent your kids and what you allow them to do and experience in their lifetimes. So if with that as a bit of a precursor, perhaps you could take it away from here, Jordan. Where would you like to go with this?
Because there's two main threads there. One was the there's that whole do nothing on the macro, not the macro, but like that scale where of your entire life you become immobile with the fear of uncertainty. What are you going to do? And I've experienced this when I was younger, and then I realized it's like, oh wait, that was terrible. I shouldn't do that to myself. But it's not that easy. But we also fall into that with regard to the people that rely on us as well. And then the overreaction on the personal scale, which culminates in, the rallying cries of, Orange Man bad, get rid of, kick the Mexicans out or something, all these things, build a wall. And
I need guns for protection.
Well,
no, you need police officers for protection. Oh, but the police officers are causing crime. That's your problem then. Fix that.
Yeah.
Have functioning police officers. You don't need a gun for protection. You need a gun for shooting practice and for hunting and stuff. I
wouldn't mind sometimes if, while the police are getting their shit together, if I had a gun for protection. That's kind of where I stand on that. But I wouldn't like to rely on it.
You're not protected.
Oh no, but
yeah, so your end goal isn't satisfied by gun ownership in the sense of insecurity.
Well, it doesn't fix the macro problem. It fixes my immediate life problem.
Yeah, but it ends in life in prison, so it doesn't really fix that problem. It just defers it.
Right. But that aside, the thing I think I want to get into is, and I think I mentioned this at the end of the last part, was the issue of that paralyzed in fear, paralyzed by the uncertainty of what could possibly happen. Now, this, I think the stereotype on this is you see a suburban mother with not letting her kids. Oh, I can't go out to do that. It could be dangerous. Oh, we can't go to that neighborhood. Oh, what if this happens? You just start running through the possible like negative scenarios, and then it ends up being nothing. But it also not in like physical uncertainty, but also what happens if my kids see something bad on the internet? What happens if they get exposed to ideas? They'll have the wrong idea, and then that uncertainty of, not just physical safety, but intellectual safety ends up actually being terribly damaging to everyone involved, and leads to very bland lives. But this
also detrimental side effects too.
Yes.
Omitted.
Yeah. And to me, a lot of that, like I talked about this very briefly in the last part, where you get this aversion to risk because I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to do this. And there's nothing worse than dying. It's like there is plenty worse than dying. Like you could get into a car accident and not die. And imagine
surviving torture is arguably worse than dying from the torture.
Yeah, or and this like mistrust of people around us. And I think we got that in our trust episode, but you don't trust the world to, or those people that are with you to learn from them. So you have this uncertainty of the future. I don't want my son or daughter or myself to be exposed to things I don't like because I don't understand. I don't know what will happen. So instead of dealing with it, I'm just going to delete it as best as possible. But that's not something that's possible. There's always going to be danger in life. You're not going to be able to delete these things, these strange ideas, until they're ready or until this, but because no one's ever ready to encounter if we could prescribe at which point in life you should be able to buy a copy of Immanuel Kant, or oh no, don't worry, you can't read John Locke yet, you're only 13 or something. It's like, what's the harm? Well, you might start having crazy ideas about liberal governments. It's like, oh, that sounds terrible.
But if they're clever enough to read something complicated and get a bad idea from it, like Mein Kampf, then they're probably clever enough to, after reading it and getting a bad idea, learning a better idea.
Well,
that's sort of how I see it.
That's a good example. Your kid picks up a copy of Mein Kampf, and they read it and they're like, whoa, this guy's hardcore. And that's one way to put it. But they actually like get into it, because they're young and impressionable. But then they go out in the world and they say, something from the book. And then, someone with authority that they trust says, they challenge them on it. And which is, and they get challenged on it, and oh no, all of a sudden their views on the thing they read change, and now they have a more nuanced appreciation for it, and they come to a different conclusion than maybe Hitler had something going on. And in our society, if someone does that, they're definitely going to get challenged on that. But rightly so.
So, yeah, and the danger there is, if you protect a kid from Mein Kampf, right? You say you can't read it because you're too young, or the Communist Manifesto, if we want to take it less extreme. If you're worried about the ideas that the kid's going to get from the Communist Manifesto, and you try to block them from it, when they eventually do read it, if they do get those crazy ideas, it's going to be really hard to get them out of those ideas because they were taught not to question things.
Right.
Like, we're creating the same trap we're trying to avoid.
Not only that, it becomes this object of mystery.
Yeah. You give it some allure,
it's like, oh,
enticement capital.
It's like, you get told one thing all your life, and all of a sudden someone's saying something different, and it's just candy to that. To a starving mind, anything different becomes.
Agnosticism blew my mind because I was raised as a theist Christian, and devoutly so for many, many years. Yeah. Just the exposure to agnosticism as another form contrary to atheism was just, I had no idea people had thought differently before because I wasn't allowed to hear it. I don't think that helps anybody. And in preventing people from acquiring thought and exposing them to new ideas, we make them more resistant to newer and better ideas down the road.
Right.
So this is where that long-term goal is not being satisfied by our short-term myopic, narrow view of how things could or should be. And right. I think that's just as dangerous as the ideas themselves are believed to be.
Yes.
They're obviously not, because they're just ideas.
Well, you're making an anti-fragile brain. And this is I guess that's Taleb's idea of, you strengthen yourself in order to be more effective. So when you're challenged, you have a more effective and more resilient response to it. But then this is brought into that. And this with Jonathan Haidt and Lukyanov's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, where they show that this is actually having they give a psychological perspective on the negative effects of this sort of over protection and over safety conscious. Well, I don't want I don't want this and I don't want that. I want them to have the perfect future, which comes from a good place. Every parent wants their kid to have the best possible life, obviously. And if they don't, well, then that's literally automatically bad parent. Straight up. It's not a good parent. And that kid is automatically going to have something to work through. And if they work through that, having a bad parent and grow up, they're actually going to be more anti-fragile than the child that had the good parents.
And it also insulates the kids from the parents' inherited prejudices. And I don't mean just racial prejudices, but things like quack science. If you want to raise a healthier kid, you don't do it by instilling in them belief systems that are wrong and then not giving them the tools to figure out that they're ever wrong. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So even if I, as a parent, have an idea about some kind of quack medicine or, homeopathy or something like that, if I don't teach my kid to think for themselves, they may either believe it or disbelieve it, whichever side they fall on, but they won't assess it for its validity in any regard whatsoever because they don't have the tools to contemplate it.
Right. They'll just go, that
ruminate and think about it.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
I like this. And it becomes a matter of, this is what I like to hear rather than this is what's true, because truth has to be confronted, because truth oftentimes is not what you want to hear. It's nice when it is. It's just oh, yes, thank you for someone confirming my suspicion on this one topic. But
that shouldn't be the dominant goal, right?
That is so rare. When it happens, it's oh, that's nice. I was right. And you go, yes. And you move on to the rest of the truth that hurts. Because, I moved recently. I don't know what's going to happen. I've got all this uncertainty, but I'm plowing through it. And I'm vindicated because the truth was that last apartment that I was living in was terrible. I'm already living a more, not easier, but more comfortable life. There's better challenges here rather than someone with COPD spitting up their phlegm on my balcony every night. So, now I have to worry about the cat getting out. Oh no, I've got better problems now because I confronted the uncertainty, because I would have been safe staying in that last apartment because I knew, and I could have negotiated for a lower rent again. But it was there's a lot that I had less freedom there. I had less, I couldn't tinker with, the place. I wasn't I had no incentive to make my place better. So now moved, I encountered uncertainty, and now I'm in a better place. I could have failed. The market could have crashed the moment we moved into this place or something. And, we would have had to deal with that, but that's something I would have had to deal with then. But you're always dealing with uncertainty on many levels. And the truth is that, I now have other problems and I can't let myself, knee jerk like I was before. And I think that's this complacency that I was talking about is, I don't want to say don't live a life of complacency, because when you're comfortable and you don't want anything to harm that. You've got a good thing going, but it's a fragile.
But the preservation of comfort can also be done intelligently, right?
Right.
You can secure your home, and after you have a secure home, you can make it more secure. But to throw 7 locks on a door instead of just 4 or 5, I mean, at some point there's an excess, right?
My favorite
And I think that's sort of what we're getting at, is when people respond excessively to the stress of uncertainty. That is, I think, basically the definition of an anxiety disorder, is when you're disorderly personally in your life due to an exaggerated fear of something that's not commensurate with the actual risk of harm at hand.
You're looking for exterior threats that you can solve instead of dealing with the inherent cause, which is an interior problem. You're always going to have uncertainty, and there's always going to be a threat. Like inherently, like if I walk across the street, I could get hit by a car. Threat. So the thing is that you kind of have to get comfortable with that. And like at my last 2 apartments I lived at, they started locking the outer door. Now in Canada, if you're watching not in Canada or in a warm place, we have to have 2 doors or the entire building will freeze. It's not about safety. It's about the weather. You have to have an outer door and an inner door. I don't know.
Part of it's fire safety because it locks the air off from the outside. But
yeah, I don't know, but I don't remember seeing that in a lot of warmer places. And I know it's, anyway, moving on. If you know, put it in the comments. But I know it helps with heating because you have this kind of like buffer that keeps the heat in to the room.
Like an airlock.
Yeah, the heat lock. And what people think of it's a security thing. Now, it does add another layer of security. You have another door that they need to get through. But the thing is that when you lock that outer door, it makes you feel safe, but you're not. And I tell my landlords this. It's like if I wanted to get in, and I think I've said this in the last podcast, you just go in through the basement window. Easy. I don't have to deal with the locks. And so you create this illusion of safety that makes you feel good. It makes you feel like nothing could happen. And once you have that illusion, which is not based in reality, you're dealing in a place of you're putting yourself in a fictional position that that is not, it's a fragile position inherently, because when something doesn't line up with reality, then you are actually putting yourself in more danger. You can be attacked from the side. You're not going to see it coming because you think you're safe. But when you realize the actual, like, I could get hit by an airplane could fall on my house. There's nothing I can do about that. I could try and make my house more structurally sound. So if an airplane hits my house, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's terrible. That's not going to happen.
But if you did all that and an airplane hits your house, it would still be excessive, even if you succeeded. You know what I mean? Because it's so unlikely that you shouldn't have been prepared for it anyway, because there are better things for you to do with your life. Mm-hmm. So I think you really hit something critical there, because you talked about like honesty and trust, but like in yourself. You have to be honest with yourself in knowing whether or not your responses are relatively sound to the environmental pressure that you're trying to extinguish, right? Mm-hmm. So like, if to be afraid of crossing the street, knowing how many car accidents there are and how many pedestrians are getting hurt, that's a fair assessment. That's enough to look both ways. But is it really enough to never cross a street? Unless there's an overpass? Like, would you walk 2 kilometers over just to cross the street and walk 2 kilometers back? Like, at some point, we should be able to discern whether something's excessive or reasonable. And that line could be slightly different, or will be slightly different for everybody. But for a lot of things that should be common sense aren't, because people allow themselves to justify their irrational ideas to themselves. They lie to themselves.
Easy
and
problem.
They accept that.
It's an easier, so having more locks on your door is an easier way to solve your general anxiety than actually going to a therapist and talking to someone about your general anxiety.
Right. But rationally, 3 locks versus 5 locks or 7. If somebody breaks through your door with 3 locks, guaranteed they have the motivation and the tools to break through 7 locks.
Yeah, they just kick your
You're
door.
not protecting yourself anymore, but allowing yourself to believe that you're more protected with more locks is a sign of obsessive compulsion.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like, and so you're not dealing with the meta issue there. You're dealing with, a portion of it. And I feel like when you're doing that, you're actually putting yourself in a position where that's not being solved. You blame, and this is kind of what I meant when I said, you move the threat to something externally when the threat of your safety is actually in your own mind. When you are putting off dealing or maturing or getting on with your life in spite of safety, then you're in a bad position because you are hindering yourself. You're stunting yourself, and it piles on. You're going to start seeing this as a defense mechanism for a bunch of other things. I eat improperly, so you can rationalize that away. Well, not me. I try and eat properly, but so you say, oh, well, and I used to see this at Starbucks. People would get non-fat lattes and then put whipped cream on top and say, oh, well, I got non-fat. It's like you just discounted 2% fat and then stuck 33% fat on top.
Yeah. And then that was all based on some quack science about how fat becomes fat in your body. And that's not how biology metabolizes fat.
Right.
Like, you need an emulsifier that'll turn it into little globlets because you can't just absorb it. And then that fat absorbs other vitamins and nutrients, which you actually need, which is the reason why we eat fat, is so that we can take in vitamins and nutrients
I have zero body
are
fat.
absorbed and soluble in fat.
Being healthy.
But it's like this oversimplification of, well, if that's fat and I swallow it, then it gets fat on me. And that's just not how our bodies produce fat. Our bodies produce fat from sugar. So it's all of these like overly simplified ideas that we try and rationalize things that are untrue rather than knowing whether or not the things we know are knowable, first of all, and second of all, whether we know the right thing.
Right.
The worst insecurity is fed off of a lack of knowledge. You don't get more insecure the more you know.
Well, and what happens is the end is that you become married to your insecurity. You become married to these inane processes that you've set up as defense mechanisms around you. I need this. This is what I hear people constantly saying. Like, I'm like they're talking about race in my wife's school. And it's like a high level school, and they're talking about like, you need to deal with race. I'm like, that's like, no, you need to deal with patients regardless of their race. Why are you worrying about what race they are until they come in the door? Like, oh, because every race needs to be taken on their own merit. No, every race, every individual needs to be taken on their own needs, not their race. And this isn't helping. And then I always hear something like, oh, well, this helps me. Because it's always like they're married to the idea. They don't want to get rid of it. So they make it personal. They make it a personal little ribbon that they wear. And they're not willing to get rid of it because it's simple. Or
those prejudices cause harm in like the opposite ways too. Like, for instance, I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was like 25. I had symptoms my whole life, but because I'm not Black or Native, which they would start looking for diabetes sooner because there's a higher prevalence of it in the community. Mm-hmm. Because I'm a white, ancestrally Jewish person, they just didn't even look. For years, I suffered, and they kept misdiagnosing me. And that's sort of like the opposite side of racism, where like you avoid certain solutions based on race when data is correlative and not causative. Mm-hmm. So it's not only the prejudices that harm people by discrimination, it's also the prejudices that harm people by neglect, which work in reverse, or as the white hillbillies might call reverse racism. But I'm not declaring victimhood or anything. What I'm saying is there is a hazard to both ends of the extremisms.
Because when you get stuff like that becoming, extremism, and it becomes ideology eventually, you get the people who are wanting all this safety and all this, security from ideas and harm. And what ends up happening in this, I know this is sounding like a conspiracy theory, is it gets codified, and then they start pushing these behaviors on everybody as a law. You have to, in Edmonton right now, I think Manitoba has a similar thing. They have like Vision Zero, where we're going to have 0 car accidents, in the next whatever time period. Doesn't matter because it's inane. It's stupid to have 0 car accidents. You're going to have to, to change that, you would have to change traffic and outlaw traffic, but they're making it So like they're putting up more cameras, they're lowering speed limits to, it's so slow to get around the city.
Meanwhile, the government's subsidizing automakers to produce more vehicles. Like,
Right.
it's insane. If you're trying to promote people to have enough money and buy more vehicles as a method of economic stability, the causal response to that will be more cars on the road. Period. That has to occur just by fundamental principles of, physics.
Right.
If you produce more cars, there are going to be more cars in existence.
Now, this manifests in other ways too, because my wife had to take what's they call it's like a sensitivity training, a mandatory waste of time, where they talk about inclusivity. And what happened was they make her say a statement, I'm an ally of this or that, to prove that she's not racist. So they made her sit through a 3-hour lecture about how she's evil because of literally her skin pigment. And everyone's talking about how, most of this graduate program level thing are, non-white female. And they're sitting around being told by this white guy how, brave they are for making it this far. And then there's white guys in the program who are coming from nothing, racking up debt to just get the chance to, and they're getting through and being told that they're bad for it. It's like,
yeah, they're paying for a finger wag.
So they're making, and what they're doing is they're forcing them all to make statements of ideology, and they're enforcing that neurotic behavior on everyone in the program. Because, this is what we need to make it safe for everybody, especially those who are, subject to harm every day because of their skin color or gender, whatever. And it's all a lie, because we're all in it together. And
in their worry about a passing slight, what they're doing is creating racism.
Right.
Down at the bottom. They're trying to avoid somebody's feelings from being hurt for 2 seconds. And as an aftershock effect of this, you're going to create racist people for a lifetime.
Right. Like, the book White Fragility is a statement of racism towards white people. I know it sounds, but that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And racism comes in every flavor, because we can be mean in very creative ways. Yes. And that's that enforcement of this that I am worried about personally, because I enjoy freedom. And you start seeing things like China. Well, freedom is actually not something that everyone wants, said people who've never had it. And then, actually we need a government that, restricts it for the good of the people. I'm just like, yeah, because let me figure myself out. Let me create my own anti-fragility. Don't pad my room, because I will, I'll become a shell of what I used to be. And I don't want that. I want to live with that risk. I'm planning on having kids. So that's a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Taking a lot of risk.
That's a lifetime of risk.
Conception itself is a lottery. And I'm already worried about a ton of stuff, but I'm planning and I'm trying to keep myself focused on it and trying not to be like, and I don't get paralyzed by the fear of the bad things that happen. Because once it happens, and this is the other thing, you're going through life, something bad happens. Well, oh no, I can't believe this happened. No, wrong attitude. Something bad happens. How do I deal with this? How do I move forward? It's happened. It's in the past. You can't go back. How do you deal with this now?
And realistically, we should be more surprised when things go right than when they go wrong. Because, it's really hard to keep an order in a system and a universe that is entirely chaotic and devolving or diving into entropy. Everything decays by nature. So everything we are constructive with or productive with is counter nature. It's all building and creating and establishing order from where there was none before.
Yeah. And not totalitarian order, but the order of order. Yeah, personal order, but also
education and healthcare and
scientific order. we use energy to reconstitute matter into a building so people don't freeze in the winter. That's order.
And tools and utilities and things like that.
Yeah. So that's at least my perspective on dealing with uncertainty. And you probably see a lot of influences, but I definitely have seen a lot of this in my own life, and I could go on forever. I think,
but there's that not like massive imbalance between people not worried about coercive speech, but are worried about a racist joke. Right. You know, like Jay Leno just the other day had to apologize for some jokes he made. As a comedian, first of all, he's not speaking as a political rights activist, or he was on TV making jokes to make jokes because that's what he did for a living, successfully.
Right.
But like, to not be worried about coercive speech or like manipulated curriculums in school, to not be worried about actual freedoms and charters of rights in favor of worrying about this fragile youth. Like, what exactly is the end goal to this?
Well, and they don't even claim, like, in the fact that they claim that, oh no, you're worrying about it, but then Dave Chappelle can make worse jokes racially, and everyone's like, oh, he's so funny. It's like,
yeah, like racist jokes are funny because they're just jokes. They would be serious and offensive if they weren't jokes.
Well, and
that's the point of a joke. It's something that is funny.
Right. And the thing about racism and what makes it so funny is that racism is inherently ridiculous.
Yes.
And the thing that makes it funny is that people actually believe it. Like,
yes,
yeah, the racism is the joke in itself. I'm pretty sure if I encountered a Southern Confederate racist, I would not be able to restrain myself from absolute laughter.
Yeah. Until you realize how serious they are, and then it's just concern. You're like, dude, we need to sit down. I'm going to buy you a dinner. We're going to talk this out.
Right. And I feel like this is going to turn into a clip, and it's going to turn into, yeah. But anyway,
but like our priorities are so skewed. You know what I mean? By looking at this as like a major problem in front of us, just like the climate change thing, saying, well, we need to reduce carbon emissions, but then not worrying about how we're calculating a reduction of carbon emissions just leads to burning more carbon.
Yeah.
Or releasing more carbon into the air.
Or
like those types of things.
We need to go to a more natural age, because we used to live it's like everything's based in like goofy moon speak, and it's absolutely nonsense. It's like,
but like they make up things like the Earth's population can't sustain more people, like just absolute nonsense. All you'd have to do is vertical farm. Yes, it's more expensive. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It means that we could support probably 10 or 15 times more people. If all of our farms were stacked 10 high
and LEDs,
we have 10 times more food. And by economies of scale, that means that we could more efficiently produce that much food
with more variety,
and more than 10 times the population of Earth. So we could be looking at 100 billion people on Earth in 200 years.
But
like to say it like with a certainty or a matter of factly that we can't sustain more a greater population is just insane. It's just lazy. Yeah, it's not based on any reality.
Well, it also feels good to be indignant. And I think that's one of the things that
be in the know.
It feels really good to hold a sign. And we got to this in our activism episode. And it feels good to be in the picket line, to yell at people, to bang on the drum, because I've been there. It feels great. But when you're in that position, you're not thinking. And that is finding that's that external locus. And I think this brings us, I think we've moved into from the internal, from the paralyzing aspect of it to the overreacting aspect of it. And this is kind of, I guess one thing leads to another and vice versa, where they play on each other, because there's this element of lying. There's no truth to it. You're not existing in the real world. And
it's lying to themselves too, in their beliefs. Like they're convinced without checking, and they're okay with that. That to me is a problem.
And one of the things is I keep hearing is it's overly subjective. You get this, well, this is my truth, and or yeah, it's a dumb thing. Like if it's truth, it's truth for everybody. Why can't we have what, like, how
That's like saying this is my car. No, it's my car. It might be a pen to you, but it's a car to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay, but you can call it that all you want, but when I tell you I'm going to pick you up in my car, you're not going to think of my pen, so it's really pointless to try and communicate with words that you just make up for yourself.
If you show up with a pen, and I'll be like, "Where's your car?" and you'll be like, "What's right here?"
I told you I was bringing my car.
And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna. You need. Let's get you some help."
It's that absurd to say, like, I have my truth and you can have your truth. And no, there is truth, and then there is subjective experience, but they're not both true.
Right. And because they're fragile, they don't put themselves in positions where they can be challenged or debated or, grow, because there's nowhere to grow from there. And you get two sides yelling at each other and everyone in the middle being like, "Oh, well, can we not?"
And it doesn't just like not fix the problem. Like it's not just that it doesn't resolve your uncertainty or on either party. It breeds even more of it. That's what I mean by compounding, and why we started with economics, because it keeps the old problem the same and makes new problems by extension. So by having that mentality where you don't want to learn more or think more deeply or be honest with yourself in the purpose of self-awareness, if you're not honest in the things you know and are teaching to the next generation, or the way you live your life, or the way you spend your money, what you're doing is promoting a broken system to the end of it being more broken. The problem gets worse. Not only that it's still there, but it's worsened by the neglect of thought. And uncertainty being related heavily to fear, and people responding reactively to fear, makes sense on a biological level. But it doesn't mean that it has to be that way.
Well, you kill the barbarians over the hill before they kill you. But we've moved beyond that. Like we have, like you can't say like, well, we're still animals. Yes, we are still those same animals. But
most animals don't have gyms where they go exercise so that they're more fit to chase predators. Like,
right.
Or prey, I mean. Like,
and it's weird because we don't need
an ability. Oh, sorry.
We don't need those muscles. Like it seems like, well, we live in this civilized world where we don't need those muscles anymore, but we don't realize that we still have to move around, and our bodies, like when we it's like, oh, I don't need to exercise because I'm an intellectual labor. It's like, yeah, but when you exercise your body, your mind, there's more calories for your mind. So you can't just make assumptions of, what the ideal will be. You have to, and I think this goes back to one of C.S. Lewis's thing, is that part of living in the house of God, I don't know if he would put it like that specifically, was living with, and this also, he actually connects this to the idea of the Tao, was living in accordance with reality. You need to be honest with your place in the world, and you can't see it from the other way. The world isn't there for you. You're part of the world. And you have to be honest of your place in that world, and you have to live with regard to reality. You can't just make up, well, this is the real world. You have to explore it. You have to think about it. You have to think about your place in it, and you have to be humbled by it. And I know that's a very Christian outlook, but he was also very interested in thinking about, he wasn't anti-science. In fact, he saw science as a very noble pursuit because it sees the world as it is. And that's what we need to do. And I think a lot of this is, you have uncertainty. What is the uncertainty? Are you lying to yourself about your uncertainty? Are you lying about the way the world is? Why are you lying about the world? And how are you reacting to that? And we create these mechanisms of safety, which to some extent, but all these bugbears that we're creating, they aren't bugbears of their own. The reason that they're so off-putting and uncanny is that they are bastardizations of things that exist to aid us. So safety. you have a seatbelt and you wear it for a reason, because the uncertainty of driving in traffic makes it such that a seatbelt is a reasonable reaction to the uncertainty of driving in traffic. Now, wearing 4 seatbelts will probably actually do more harm, because you're not going to have that give, because it needs to
or a helmet that doesn't let you shoulder check or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a bastardization of the so you're seeing it. It's a bastardization of an actual useful thing. So we've been talking about climate change, and we have an actual problem. Like there's an issue, but instead of looking at it in a way that allows us to innovate and come up with creative solutions, we're just deleting things that actually help in an attempt to think in a way that will help, without any actual evidence that will help. And we're actually kneecapping ourselves in dealing with it by doing a lot of these knee-jerk measures. And it's the same with raising kids, in that paralyzing way where you have you're dealing with the uncertainty of the future. You're dealing with the uncertainty of raising children, because who knows what's going to happen, but you're doing your best. And that uncertainty can be bastardized and be corrupted. I think corrupted is a better word, by making sure and like cherry picking what they need, what they absorb, and what they do in order to provide some hypothetical end, but it's more, raising children is so complicated that you don't know. Just like the economy, you can't control the economy. And we saw the corruption of actual economic controls, like we were talking about in the first part, in places like the Soviet Union or in Nazi Germany, where they centralized everything in one go, and the other go, they just deferred to monopolies like Krupp and the other manufacturers, who ended up having extreme economic power because of it. So in both cases, millions died because of this corruption of an actual reaction, an actual legitimate reaction to a real problem, based on perceived lies about what's causing that problem. And I think I I made that a little complicated, but I think I said what I needed to say there, because
good. And just to sort of pin onto what you said, because I think you put it very well. It requires honesty. Like, awareness requires honesty. And it's not about being or looking honest. It's about actually analyzing scientifically the things that you think and believe, and how you respond and choose to respond to other things. Mm-hmm. So the COVID pandemic is a great example of this. It's more recent than like Roman empires or World War II's or whatever. But in the COVID pandemic pointed out exactly how our misplaced skepticism can be harmful and cost lives. Mm-hmm. Because people chose to believe one thing over another thing and chose not to look at the data. They just chose to pick a side and believe it for no reason.
The political situation,
and then adamantly just crammed it down everyone's throats that they're right. And the more often they say it, the more people believe it. And the more people believe it, they believe their beliefs are reaffirmed. Like vindicated, like you said. Like, it somehow makes it more true that more people believe in something that's wrong. And that's not how truth works. Like, it's not a matter of who said it. Like, quoting people doesn't mean that every quote that person's ever said makes them brilliant. Just because they develop E = MC squared doesn't mean that everything they've ever said was accurate. You know what I mean?
Especially quoting them on a different topic than they're actually talking about.
Yeah, or misquoting out of context or something like that. But we do it all the time. And that to me is just as dangerous as forbidding thought, or for engineering a type of thinking in a school, like you were saying with your significant other. the ramifications of those harms are so long-standing, and we're so nearsighted to think that this fragility problem is the biggest thing that we could deal with right now, when these administrations should be wondering why their offices are so bloated and they can't afford to pay their teachers properly.
Yeah.
Like, they should be wondering why students are still in debt into their 30s and then wondering why they're not having kids or buying homes.
And why are you paying like committee heads of like diversity and inclusion offices hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, like there's some like 400,000, 300,000 a year salaries for these people to just sit and find things that are racist and not inclusive, and like you have.
And then they snatch up research funding and spend that funding on some useless program just because it's trendy or hip or it's topical or because politically, people care about this. Well, who gives a shit about the people's interest? If people are interested in something dumb, you're the smart person at the university. You should be telling them, no, that's stupid. I'm going to do this instead with the money.
Right.
Like, you know better. You shouldn't be pandering to the public when they're not experts. You are. Just like the government shouldn't be pandering to the public to get elected to make, policy changes when people don't know jack shit about diplomacy.
Right. Well, you're the intelligentsia. You're supposed to be intelligent. Act like it.
You should be able to explain yourself in a way that's rational enough that other intelligent people can follow along.
Without simply resorting to what emotion. Everyone else says. Yeah.
But that comes down to that awareness and honesty requiring truth. And I think you put that really well. It also sort of brings me to when I brought up the idea of fitness, I was sort of thinking about it in a more abstract sense, in the sense that we may be animals, but we're not like animals because we can inject volition into the things that we choose to do. Mm-hmm. Animals are proficient at what they do through evolution. Just trial and error, random lottery, shotgun approach. Well, we can choose to be, I'm not the most physically fit person, but if I work hard enough at it and I manage my diet and stuff and I take medicines that I need, I can get stronger. Mm-hmm. We can choose to change our bodies and to change our minds and to change our social structures. Animals just behave the way they behave. You can't make a chimp more civilized.
Well, we're both sentient.
Think about civility.
We're sapient, I think, is the difference there.
Yeah, we are. And that makes us homos. But that is the sapien versus the Neanderthal, the Homo erectus and Homo habilis. Like, that's what made us different. That's what made us successful and not them, is that we could engineer our lives and our societies and our tools and our living standards to a greater cause, a greater good. And we should be leveraging that now that we have technology that makes information not lossy. Like, for all of history, information was lossy.
That's a really good way of putting it.
We've never had a better opportunity to make a better planet that's more sustainable than in the last 30 years. And I think one of the biggest travesties of our entire generation, yours and mine, is that we didn't recognize that right away. We should be noticing the fact that we can finally have a world without war, where we never could before because of communication and diplomacy, and we're not doing it.
Well, it's interesting because I've been seeing a lot of people on what would traditionally be called the conservative side of the topic are now speaking as, like I'm seeing this more and more, is that you're starting to see people using rhetoric such as they're getting us into a war. Why would we go to war when we could, do stuff like trade? Why would we, war is now becoming, at least in our world, this thing that doesn't actually solve anything. And it's wonderful. It's going to be slow to actually get rid of it. But the fact that on every side, people are taking this to heart it's a nice little reaction. But when you get to an extreme position, well, the extreme position is, and I think we defined it in our podcast at one time as by any means necessary, and that includes war. But if the ends justify the means, but the thing is that we realize nowadays is that war is how do I say this? This is almost exactly what we're talking about. War is a reaction onto uncertainty that that is it's unnecessary unless
it doesn't address the problem.
It doesn't address the problem. But like, again, if someone's attacking you, it's like you're going to want to have to be able to fight back. If someone else makes a knee-jerk decision, you're going to want to have someone to just, put them down when they come to your borders with, tanks.
But if you squeeze off the energy supply of a country and then expect them to not be angry with you, and then you want to reinforce that anger by forcibly making sure that your uncertainty isn't satisfied, like, to be worried about Iran making nukes, that'll always be a problem. Then another country will make a weapon that could destroy the planet. That's a legit fear. But to act on that fear and cause those people to hate the entire world is not the way to stop them from blowing the world up.
See Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah. Like, you don't prevent people wanting to kill you by feeding arms and guns to people actively causing a civil war in, say, Yemen. You don't sell guns and stuff to Saudi Arabia to cause a war just because you don't want to be involved in the war yourself. That's nearsighted. And I think that other people dying is okay if it serves your own ends.
And I think this brings us to a good little final point, which is you don't know the future. You have this uncertainty, but you want, and I'm thinking of those generals in Dr. Strangelove. They all had an idea, and they didn't want a future where, the Russians were in control, and the Russians didn't want a future where the Americans were in control. And this was driving a lot of Cold War policy. And we're uncertain about what we want, but we're certain about what we don't want. But the thing is that we don't realize that, okay, this is complicated, but we don't realize that because we are uncertain about the future, we don't know that future will actually be the hell that you think it is, or even end up the communists take over. But then we don't know that communism, if the Russians would have won the Cold War, we don't know that the Russians wouldn't have, come to their senses and actually,
or established a better democracy. How ironic would that be?
Well, it's interesting because, you have
possible.
You have something. Oh yeah, it's because you get someone like Gorbachev who's like, okay, let's perestroika and glasnost, and we'll get this Soviet Union thing on track. But the openness showed all the deficiencies in the system, so they're trying to reform it, and there was uncertainty as to what was going to happen with the Soviet Union, and then it just collapsed. And what happened was it was kind of a bonanza, but Russia,
that was after years of failures had accumulated all to one tipping point. You know what I mean?
Right. And so we could have blown them out, but it was, in the end, we didn't have a global war. We settled for a Cold War and a bunch of proxy wars, which killed, a fraction of what we could have done. But okay, that's an unpopular opinion, but whatever. But
backed up by fact, though.
we let them die on their own, and then we were hoping they would become an ally. We can trade with them and make friends because what we want is friends. And unfortunately, the damage was so deep that they turned into what they are today. But there's still hope. We don't need to go to war with them. We can hope. The uncertainty doesn't need to be such that, Russia's going to do this and we don't know what they're going to do. But we can also hope that the uncertainty will lead to something that we never expected. So we go to war with, China or something, or we could play our cards a little better and hope for a future that is something that we didn't imagine. Because that one that you're imagining with, mutually assured destruction or human wave attacks on Los Angeles, or something like that, that's worst case scenario. And that would result from a knee-jerk reaction to the uncertainty of the relations between these two superpowers. Or we could see what the future has in store and work for a better way, despite the uncertainty of the inherent political system. And I think that's it, because you don't know. Also, this works on the micro level too. You don't know what your life is going to have in store. And I've been surprised by the turns my life's taken. And I'm sure a lot of people listening have too. And we can plan as best as we can, but good things are going to happen in spite of what you do. And unfortunately, you can't do anything to stop those good things from happening. So I guess, you could stop them by not doing anything at all, or by overreacting. So cheers.
Yeah, cheers to that.
So
I think we don't know what's in store for the future, but what we do know certainly is that we can engineer the future. We can design and affect and influence the future deliberately. Through conscious effort, we can make decisions to say, I want tomorrow to be better than today, even if I won't personally enjoy it. Mm-hmm. We can choose to impose our volition and our will and spend our life's energies making the world something that is sustainably better for everyone.
Yeah.
And the things holding us back, there are many. Environment is one. The Earth's constantly trying to kill us.
It always has been. It's
the laws of physics. They make us age. Yeah. Oxygen is free radicals, and it makes your cells decay. And there's all kinds of things trying to kill us all the time. But
Australia.
But the things we can do are exponentially greater than the things that can just fall apart and happen to us. Mm-hmm. And the proof of that is the construction of everything around us. In just a matter of a few hundred years, we've built cities, like full-on cities, full-on supply chains, full-on medical networks. Like, we went from 0 to 100 in 100 years. That's proof, cold hard data that shows that we can make a better world than we started with.
And that's a sacrifice that a lot of people made with labor, not just their lives, but with their labor, that it's like kind of a Remembrance Day thing. They made that decision to work for a better future, but they benefit from it, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
You put work in, you benefit. Wrong with
seeing personal gain and getting the spoils of reward.
No.
But to have an uncertainty feed a war is insane, because we know it's pointless. We know absolutely and factually that starting war is pointless.
Never start a fight. You always finish it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are obviously cases of self-defense, and I'm not saying that nobody should ever have an army or anything like that. But what I'm saying is funding a proxy war, with the Kurds or something, not because you support the cause of the Kurds to have independence and their own, to be free from oppression. The idea should be to have everybody so intellectually enlightened that ideas can pass around freely, that you don't need to arbitrate or police people's speech to get them to act in a reasonable way with their fellow men.
Well, why did
the agreement that is actually agreed upon, and not just some type of extortion allowance or some type of legal way of manipulating systems for personal exorbitant benefit.
Or even this, which is going to be haram, that what if the Kurds didn't need their own border? What if they could just live happily with everyone around them just because they can live happily? What if the Israelis and the Palestinians just stopped giving a crap about what the soil, who the soils belong to at that moment, and just lived there with each other?
Whenever you have a dominator, you have an oppression system. Mm-hmm. And whenever there's a system of oppression, people are going to fight back.
Yeah.
So what we really need to do is figure out a way to remove the dominance from the equation. To say not to say bygones are bygones. We'll still discuss it, and we'll still talk about reparations with Black people and all that. We're not trying to say that there's no harm done, but we're saying let's stop causing more of it. Let's just make a concerted effort to cut off all our losses right now and work forward. And the way you do that is by you have on the Israeli side saying, okay, we're going to stop bulldozing homes to build one farm, put 40 people out on the street and lock them behind a 15-foot wall with concrete barbed wire and armed guards for checkpoints.
They just keep trolling each other.
And on the other side, they should be able to say, we need organization and political structure because our people can't be well sustained on the Palestinian side with corruption and violent tendencies in government. because all they're doing is dragging all the other people into another conflict.
So you need like a meta state that doesn't give a crap about, who's got claims to what. They just enforce the freedom of everyone in their state. And I'm saying like a meta state as in a democracy, not so
a true democracy, not one that just panders to votes, like something that's not campaign finance and it's not
just
lobby
something
groups
that
and it's not
allows
judges.
When I like I keep going back to these I don't even know, I'm probably going to sound like a libertarian, whatever. I like to think of it as classical liberal because you need something that's not going to it's going to say, we don't care about your heritage or religion or anything. The state is just here to make sure everyone gets their freedom, as, in the Lockean sense.
Mm-hmm.
You get the freedom from everyone to not kill each other, to respect each other's property, and to not damage each other's health. And that fourth thing that, oh man, Locke's he's disappointed in me right now. So, liberty. So to go and talk to, the important one. So to think and say and talk to whoever you want. And that includes the perceived enemy. So, you have a friend, you go to all of a sudden you can go to the Palestinian quarter and talk to that Palestinian guy who you just like drinking coffee with. Oh no. But no, you're sitting there claiming each other thing, trolling each other, and exacerbating the situation. Yes, I'm claiming that both of you are to blame. No one's right. No one's wrong. You're all I'm sorry. And that's kind of what I feel. Not feel.
The way I see it, there are varying degrees. But just because one person's worse doesn't make the other person okay. They both have to stop.
Yes.
They both have to recognize that, hey, I'm causing you harm and you're causing me harm. Let's both stop causing each other harm and finish it out or figure it out.
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen. And if you can't do that on your own, just me and you, then you and I need to agree on a third party to get involved. And there should be other third parties that are like peaceful countries who have successfully negotiated their peace deals and agreements. Be like, hey, you should come in here. Show us how to build a power reactor that doesn't poison all of our people or poison the people down the river.
And those people be chomping at the bit to get in there because it's like, oh, you want to, let's build tons of infrastructure. Do you want the deluxe package?
Yeah. And we don't need to do it like China where we exploit people and say only Chinese people and Chinese government or contractors get these contracts.
And only if you put in our surveillance cameras, which is, the Americans did that in the Cold War with their economic hitman type thing.
They did it all through Latin America. They absolutely destroyed an entire continent worth of countries just because they wanted control and dominance over, because of their uncertainty, this fear that other countries might rise up against them or do something scary or think something scary like communism. That's not an excuse to harm. Even if you disagree with people, those people should just be free to leave. If somebody doesn't want to live in North Korea,
America has to trust them. Well, that's the Americans. The Americans needed to trust that South America would do their thing, and it's the same thing with the Chinese now with their, new Chinese colonialism, where they need to trust that business will just happen. Even though Xi Jinping doesn't like it. Oh no, it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. I lost control. Well, tough.
But again, there's an oppressor.
Yeah, he's an oppressor.
There's an oppression happening, and that's got to stop. You can never go on one side and say, hey, Chinese people just stop freaking out. Meanwhile, letting Xi Jinping run amok.
Yeah.
Because it guaranteed will not fix things. It'll make things worse to not resist Xi Jinping. But, and there's a very big critical but, if the people all agree that an external solution is ideal, and they all went to the UK and said, hey, UK, we want our own country, so we don't want you to invade and take over and own Hong Kong. But if you help us establish a reasonable democratic state and revolution without selling us arms and guns and bombs, but show us how to set up a parliament. Show us how to actually do diplomacy against a tyrant. Everybody's in it together. The whole world would help them figure that out. Nobody wants China to be run by a dictator.
Well, that's kind of what happened, and this is a strange way to look at it, but it's kind of what happened to Canada. Was I think it was Balfour came in. This guy came in from Britain and kind of did a survey of the Canadian colony and looked at it and said, this land's too big to, rule over from Britain and London. The only way the only way this dominion is going to be able to run is if we just kind of let it do its own thing and just kind of have some edifice of control over it.
And have it pay homage or something to the homeland.
And so he kind of realized that in like the 1830s or 40s. And he made this recommendation to the Crown, and it ended up with Canada just being like, oh, cool, thanks. And it ended up interesting because Canada contributed more as a free state than it would have ever as a directly controlled colony.
Mm-hmm.
And I think...
And they benefited from our technology. We became the first peacekeeping forces in wars and stuff, supporting people without supporting the murder, but like supporting with food, provisions. Like the UNICEF and Blue Hats and stuff are pretty much modeled after Nordic countries and Canadian style socialist military. Yeah. And we've actually pioneered a whole bunch of technological advancements and schools of thought in Canada that are attributed to other countries because our country had the liberal freedom to have such discussions and funding, like social funding. Our public schools are some of the best in the world relative to the whole world. That's not to say they're perfect. And we've got issues with, having assimilated Native peoples through our public schools. So they're not without fault or history either. Like there's some very traumatically terrible things that our school system has done to families across generations. But the thing is, we were open enough to be able to reconsider our past and learn from it.
Instead of doubling down. Oh no, the population hates us. Put cameras everywhere and lock them in their homes.
Right. It's doing the opposite of what everybody's traditionally done, where their insecurity feeds them to hoard more guns, be more forceful, be more dominant so that we're less uncertain about the capacity and ability of another country overthrowing us. Or flooding across our borders. We want control at the border. Why? Not because they're less human than us, because they crossed an imaginary line. Like, so your citizenship depends on your geography, which was arbitrarily drawn based on murders and war. Like, the fact that we have countries is useful politically because then we can organize people of similar values and geographies and cultures to be productive. But it's not a definitive sign that says one human being is more or less than another human being because of a line.
Yeah.
That was never the function or purpose of borders.
Well, the new borders that are set up were set up in such a way, like this is a line. This line makes war illegal. If you cross this line, there's war. You're not allowed to go to war because if we go to war, it's this weird counterintuitive thing that we set up that these are like after World War II, it's just like, okay, these are the borders. We don't care what you think. Well, why did you set up borders? I don't like it. Well, it's not really to take you into account. It's to stop this happening again because now this is enforced. Well, why? Well, some nations are bad. Well, the thing is that those nations can become better than they were before. We can bring them out of that. Instead of just bringing them into the good place, we can make that area a good place instead of...
And without any rule of law whatsoever, you'd just have militias all over the place and there'd be no control, like in the Middle East with all the little ISIL groups and stuff,
Yeah, ISIS.
Like that's what happens when you don't have borders. So borders are useful, but the fact that you can prevent a person seeking asylum from crossing your border, knowing that there's human rights abuses abroad, that's just as criminal as neglect. If you see somebody about to shoot a gun at somebody else and you just turn around, walk away, say nothing, don't call the cops, if you do nothing, that's neglect. Like, there are ways to prevent harms, and I think diplomacy is something we haven't actually explored like fully yet. We're still working on it as a more enlightened people in the information age. But what really needs to be heavily weighted in our conversations is the fact that we haven't done it all yet. We've only just started learning how to do things properly. Before technology, we didn't have the opportunity to discuss things in different languages and have a machine learning algorithm translated on the fly. Things like that just weren't possible. you had people interpreting things, and lost in translation from human to human to human is common enough even when people speak the same language. Never mind when it's being translated between like cultures and across different biospheres and stuff. So
right. So I think one of the things we've gotten a bit off topic. We started talking about
but it's what I'm trying to get at with the subject, though, is the uncertainty is the reason for the calamitous activities that we engage in all over the place.
Right.
Like almost unilaterally. The way we hate people is based on our uncertainty of what they're going to do. The way we sanction other countries, our uncertainty based on their power and control over our economy. The way we do it with childhood experiences and how we raise kids to be fearful and fragile and everything is based in uncertainty. It's all these levels of harm caused by this anxiety, this pervasive, ubiquitous human social anxiety of each other, rather than being constructive and cognizant of the fact that we can all together directly influence the future as opposed to being scared of it. It should be an opportunity for everybody today to be more optimistic than ever about the future of humanity. There's never been less reason to be nervous about each other because we can talk to each other. We know exactly where they're coming from.
A good book on that would be, I think it's Matt Ridley's, there it is. It's Matt Ridley's The Rational Optimist. And he actually looks at prosperity as a evolving historical thing. And that's what that book's about. That's a good book. I like Matt Ridley. He's this old guy who's like...
Yeah, we should always be plugging literature. I'll never turn that down.
Yeah. I think...
On that note, I think that's all I wanted to get at.
Yeah, I think we've said what we needed to say.
Exposure to ideas is important. Being compassionate is important.
Being uncomfortable is okay.
But being capitulating is not okay. We shouldn't just give in because enough people are loud enough about a subject. That's not a good reason. That's a good reason to have a conversation, but it's not a good reason to implement policies or force thought or coerce written statements of, non-bias attributions in educational institutions. Like,
have my bias, not yours.
That's not the function of a school. The function of a school is to think more, not less. And awareness and honesty, super critical, because we all do it.
All right.
Thanks for the conversation.
That's been episode 18 of Frivolous Gravitas. Again, if you have any comments or criticisms or tomatoes to throw at us, just leave them in the comments, and we'll see you next week.
Das Vidanya.
Adios.